The Man in the Rain. It was a cold, rainy evening in downtown Los Angeles. The city buzzed as usual, cars honking, people rushing with umbrellas, neon lights flickering in the puddles on the sidewalk. Yet amid all this noise and motion, a small, quiet figure sat alone at the edge of a lonely bus stop bench. The rain soaked his faded gray coat. His back was hunched, hands shaking as he clutched an old hat close to his chest. From beneath its brim, tears rolled down the man's wrinkled cheeks, mixing with the rain. Most people walked past without a glance. Some saw him but looked away. A few slowed down, only to move on quickly, uncomfortable with the image of a crying stranger. No one stopped. No one asked. And for the old man whose name was Walter, this wasn't new. He had been invisible to the world for a long time. Walter was 82. Once a proud teacher, a husband, a father. But life had changed. His wife had passed 10 years ago. His only son had moved across the country and hadn't called in months. His retirement savings were gone after a failed surgery and rising rent. That day, Walter had left the tiny room he rented with news no one wants to hear. His home was being taken. He had nowhere to go. The last bus home had already left. And so he sat in the rain, hopeless and alone. But fate, as it often does, had other plans. Across the street, hidden beneath the hood of a simple jacket, stood Keanu Reeves. He had just wrapped up a quiet evening at a nearby bookstore. He liked walking alone. No bodyguards, no fanfare, just peace. He noticed the man at the bus stop not because of his tears but because of the silence around him. In a city that rarely slowed down, the stillness around the old man stood out like a whisper in a storm. Keanu crossed the street, careful not to startle him. He stood quietly beside the bench, pretending to check the bus schedule. But he kept glancing over. The man didn't look up, just stared down at the hat in his hands, which held a small photograph. A black and white image of a smiling woman and a little boy holding a toy airplane. "Rough night?" Keanu said softly. Walter didn't answer at first. Then slowly he turned and looked at him. There was something kind in Keanu's eyes, something that didn't come from pity. It came from understanding. "I've had better," Walter replied, in a cracked voice. Keanu nodded, then sat down next to him. "Want to talk about it?" he asked. Walter let out a soft laugh, bitter and tired. "Talking doesn't fix things. It doesn't bring back my wife, or my son, or my home." "No," Keanu said, "but sometimes it brings back hope." There was a long pause. Then Walter spoke. He told Keanu about his life, about his wife, Margaret, who had been his world, about their son Daniel, who had grown distant after Margaret's death, about the years of loneliness that followed, about losing his home that morning and having nowhere to sleep that night. Keanu listened without interrupting, his face never changing but his eyes growing softer with each word. When Walter finished, there was silence again. The rain had started to lighten, but the cold remained. "You know," Keanu said finally, "my mother used to say, even the darkest clouds pass faster when you share your umbrella." I think she meant more than just rain. Walter smiled for the first time that evening. It was small, but it was real. Then something unexpected happened. A car pulled up near the curb. A man inside yelled out, "Keanu! Yo, it's you, right?" A couple of teenagers pulled out their phones, starting to film from across the street, but Keanu didn't move. He didn't look away. He stayed beside Walter, ignoring the cameras. "You hungry?" Keanu asked. "I haven't eaten since morning," Walter admitted. Keanu stood and offered his hand. "Then let's change that." Walter hesitated. "Why are you doing this?" Keanu smiled gently. "Because someone once did it for me." And with that, he helped Walter up. Cameras clicked. Videos started recording. But what mattered wasn't what people would later see on their screens. What mattered was what Walter felt at that moment. He wasn't invisible anymore. They walked side by side into the night, the neon lights reflecting in the puddles around them. And for the first time in a long time, Walter didn't feel cold. That night was only the beginning. The dinner that changed everything. Walter followed Keanu down the wet sidewalk, still unsure if this was real or just a dream brought on by exhaustion and hunger. They didn't speak much as they walked. Keanu didn't try to fill the silence. He just matched Walter's slow steps, offering a steady presence that made Walter feel strangely safe. They turned into a quiet street and approached a small, cozy-looking diner with warm lights glowing through fogged-up windows. As they stepped inside, the scent of freshly baked bread and sizzling butter wrapped around them like a blanket. It had been years since Walter had smelled food that made his stomach ache in such a gentle human way. The hostess looked up, and her eyes widened for a split second, recognition flickering in her gaze, but Keanu gave her a small nod and she smiled, saying nothing, just leading them to a booth in the corner where no one would bother them. Walter slid into the seat carefully, his old bones aching. Keanu sat across from him, removing his damp jacket and setting it beside him. A waitress came over, her pen poised. "What can I get you, gentlemen?" Keanu looked at Walter. "Order anything you want." "Really?" Walter cleared his throat. Maybe just a grilled cheese sandwich and a coffee." Keanu turned to the waitress. "Make that 2 grilled cheese sandwiches, tomato soup for both, and 2 coffees, black." As the waitress walked away, Walter blinked. "You didn't have to do that." "I know," Keanu said, looking out the window. "But I wanted to." They sat quietly for a moment as raindrops streaked the glass. Outside, the city kept moving, but inside the booth it was calm, the kind of calm Walter hadn't known in years. "So," Keanu said eventually, "you were a teacher?" Walter's face softened. "Yeah. History. 37 years. I taught everything from ancient Greece to World War II. Loved every minute of it." Keanu leaned forward. "What made you love it?" Walter chuckled. "Kids didn't always care about dates and kings, but they cared about stories. I told them about people who made choices that changed the world, not just the famous ones. The quiet ones, too. Like the woman who refused to move from a bus seat, or the farmer who fed strangers during the Depression. I wanted them to understand that history wasn't just about battles. It was about kindness, too." Keanu listened carefully. "Sounds like you were the kind of teacher I wish I'd had." Walter smiled, eyes glistening again. But this time it wasn't sadness, it was gratitude. When the food arrived, Walter hesitated before picking up his spoon. "You know, Keanu, I still don't understand why you're doing this." Keanu dipped his spoon into the soup. "Years ago, before all the fame, I was going through a rough patch. I lost someone close to me. I was angry, lost, didn't care about anything. And then a stranger noticed, sat with me, listened, didn't try to fix me, just reminded me that I mattered. I never forgot that. Now, whenever I see someone who looks like they've been forgotten by the world, I remember that moment." Walter took a bite. The soup was hot and soothing, like something his wife might have made long ago. He didn't say anything more for a while. They finished their meal slowly, savoring not just the food but the warmth of company, the comfort of being seen. After the plates were cleared, Keanu looked at Walter. "Do you have anywhere to stay tonight?" Walter looked down. "No, I was going to sleep on that bench." Keanu shook his head gently. "Not tonight." Walter looked up, confused. "I have a guest room in the place I'm renting this month. It's quiet, no strings, just for tonight. You'll be safe, warm, and tomorrow we'll figure things out." Walter blinked at him. "You're serious?" "Completely. What if I said no? Then I'd sit with you at that bench until morning," Keanu said without hesitation. Something inside Walter cracked open. Not in a painful way, but like a door that hadn't been opened in a long time was suddenly letting in light. They left the diner. The rain had stopped. A soft breeze whispered through the streets. They walked a few blocks to a quiet building with ivy growing up the side. Keanu led him upstairs to a simple but beautiful apartment. It wasn't filled with luxury, it was filled with calm. Soft rugs, books on every surface, and a guitar leaning against a shelf. Keanu showed him to the guest room. The bed was already made. A small lamp glowed in the corner. A robe and towel were folded neatly on the chair. Walter stood there for a long moment. This is too much. No, it's not, Keanu said. It's just enough. Thank you, Walter whispered. Keanu smiled. Sleep well, Walter. We'll talk more in the morning. That night, Walter lay in a warm bed for the first time in weeks. He looked at the photo of his wife and son, still safe in the hat he carried. He placed it gently on the bedside table. Outside the window, the moon peeked through drifting clouds, and for the first time in years, Walter felt like he wasn't just surviving. He was living. A letter, a memory, and a knock on the door. Walter awoke to the sound of birdsong. Soft, sweet notes filtering through a slightly open window. For a second, he didn't remember where he was. The bed beneath him was warm, the pillow smelled faintly of lavender, and the walls around him weren't cracked or cold. It wasn't the cramped room he rented near the train tracks. It wasn't the hard bench at the bus stop. It was safe. As he sat up slowly, his joints creaking in protest, his eyes fell on the photograph he had placed on the bedside table. The night before. The image of Margaret and little Daniel smiled back at him. It felt like they were both watching over him. He let out a long breath and whispered, "Good morning, my love." In the living room, Keanu was already up. He wore a soft black sweater and loose pants, standing barefoot in the kitchen, making coffee. The rich aroma filled the space. Jazz music played low in the background, and the entire place felt like a quiet retreat from the noise of the world. Walter stepped out hesitantly. "Morning," he said, his voice rough. Keanu turned, smiling. "You slept okay?" Walter nodded. "Like I was back in my 20s. Keanu handed him a steaming mug. "You like it black, right?" Walter took the mug, wrapping his hands around it. "Yeah. Thanks." They sat by the window, sipping quietly. Outside, the city stretched awake, horns honking faintly in the distance, people walking their dogs, life beginning again. Walter looked out and asked softly, "Do you ever get tired of being recognized?" Keanu shrugged. "Sometimes. But moments like yesterday remind me why I stay grounded. Fame is just noise. Connection, that's real." Walter smiled gently. "You've got an old soul." "Maybe," Keanu said. "Or maybe I just listen more than I speak." After breakfast, Keanu handed Walter a fresh notepad and pen. "I was thinking, you've lived through so much. Maybe you could write it down." Walter raised an eyebrow. "Write what down?" "Your life, your stories, the students you taught, the love you shared with your wife, the moments that shaped you. You said you were a storyteller, right?" Walter hesitated. His fingers ran over the cover of the notebook. It felt strange, this idea of writing again. He hadn't held a pen in months, maybe longer, but something stirred inside him, a small flame that hadn't gone out, just waited for the right breath of air. "I don't know where to start," Walter admitted. Keanu leaned forward. "Start with her. With Margaret." And so Walter began to write. He wrote for hours, pausing only to sip water or stretch his fingers. Keanu checked on him every now and then, but didn't interrupt. By noon, Walter had filled 5 pages. He had written about the first time he saw Margaret, how she was playing piano at a school fundraiser, her laughter louder than the music. He wrote about their wedding, their tiny first apartment, their son Daniel's birth. He wrote about how, even when life was hard, Margaret made it feel like they were dancing in a warm kitchen. As he finished a sentence about the last vacation they took before her illness, Walter stopped. His hand trembled slightly. "You okay?" Keanu asked from the doorway. Walter nodded, but his voice cracked. "I didn't think I could still feel all this." Keanu stepped into the room. "Grief isn't the end of love. It's proof that it was real." Walter set the notebook down and wiped his eyes. "You talk like a poet." "Nah," Keanu smiled. "I just listened to a lot of old souls." Just then, there was a knock on the door. Keanu stood. "Expecting anyone?" Walter shook his head. Keanu opened the door. Standing there was a delivery, man holding a small package. "For Walter Hayes," he said. Walter frowned. "For me?" The package was light. Inside was a plain envelope unmarked. Walter opened it slowly, revealing a letter in familiar handwriting. His son's dad. "I'm sorry for the silence. I don't have any excuses. I've been angry, lost, and confused since Mom passed. But last night I saw a video online. Someone filmed you at a bus stop with Keanu Reeves. The internet is blowing up. But that's not what got me. It was your face. I could see everything in it. The pain, the love, the strength. I miss you, Dad. And I'm ashamed it took something like this for me to realize that. I want to come see you. Please let me know where you are. Love." Daniel Walter stared at the letter. Tears ran down his cheeks. Not from sadness, but from something deeper. From a wound slowly starting to heal. Keanu read the expression on his face without asking a single question. "He wants to see me," Walter said. "That's beautiful," Keanu replied. Walter looked up. "I thought he hated me. I thought he was gone for good." "Sometimes," Keanu said gently. "We all just need a reminder of where we came from." Walter folded the letter and held it close to his chest. "I don't know what comes next, but I want to try." Keanu stood beside him, a steady hand on his shoulder. "You're not alone, Walter. Not anymore." Later that afternoon, Keanu helped Walter draft a reply. They sat at the table together, choosing each word carefully. Walter wrote slowly but with a steady hand, telling Daniel he forgave him, that he missed him too, and that he was ready to talk whenever his son was ready to listen. They sent the letter, and for the first time in a long while, Walter felt something powerful rising in his chest. Hope. Father and son, heart to heart, 3 days passed, each one warmer than the last, not because of the weather, but because Walter felt something returning to him. Purpose. He spent those days writing, walking with Keanu through quiet city parks, sharing stories and sipping tea from chipped mugs on the apartment balcony. And yet, through all the quiet joy, Walter's heart beat a little faster each time the mailman walked by, each time his phone buzzed with a new notification. He was waiting and hoping. On the 4th morning, the knock on the door came early. Too early for deliveries. Too early for the mail. Walter had just sat down to tie his shoes when Keanu opened the door, and there stood a tall man in his mid-30s, his brown hair slightly unkempt, his eyes sunken with travel, regret, and something far more fragile. Hope. "Dad?" "The," man said, his voice trembling. Walter froze. His eyes met the man's and he didn't move. He simply stared, like he was trying to decide whether this moment was real or a memory from a better time. But then the photo flashed in his mind, the one of Margaret holding a young boy with a toy airplane. And in an instant, he knew. "Daniel," Walter whispered. Daniel stepped inside slowly, removing his backpack, uncertain if he was welcome. Keanu stepped back, allowing space between the two, his presence quiet and respectful. Walter rose to his feet, wobbling slightly, and then took a step forward. The air between them was heavy, charged with years of silence, guilt, and love too, long buried. "I didn't think I'd ever see you again," Walter said. Daniel's eyes brimmed with tears. "I thought I could live without looking back, but I was wrong." They stood face to face, father and son, separated by time and pain, now held together by one act of kindness that had rippled across the internet, across hearts, and across distances that felt impossible. "Why now?" Walter asked gently, his voice not accusing, only aching. Daniel swallowed hard. "Because I saw you, really saw you. And for the first time in years, I realized I wasn't angry at you. I was angry at myself. I didn't know how to live without Mom. And it felt easier to run than to face the pain." Walter nodded slowly. "I understand. More than you think." Daniel took a deep breath. "I missed you every day, but pride kept me silent. I thought you were doing better without me. I didn't think you wanted to hear from me." Walter smiled softly. I waited every night for a letter, a phone call, anything. Daniel took another step forward, and Walter didn't wait. He opened his arms. Daniel hesitated for half a second, then fell into his father's embrace. It was not a perfect hug. It was awkward, stiff, filled with tears and old wounds. But it was real. And real was all they needed. Keanu watched quietly from the doorway, his heart full. He had seen so much pain in his life, lost so many people. And yet here, in this room, he was witnessing something he rarely saw. Healing, Walter and Daniel sat down at the table where the notebook still lay open. Daniel picked it up and flipped through the pages, his eyes scanning the words. "You wrote all this?" he asked. "Memories," Walter replied. "I thought maybe, if you ever came back, I could give you pieces of her, of us." Daniel smiled. "I'd like to read every page." Keanu poured them tea and left the two alone, stepping out for a walk. He knew they needed time. Time to talk, to cry, to fill the cracks that had spread through their relationship. He walked through the park, hands in his pockets, reflecting on how a simple moment, one night at a rainy bus stop, had led to something so profound. When he returned a few hours later, laughter met him at the door. Inside, Walter and Daniel were going through old photos. Walter pointed to one. "This was the time you built a fort in the living room and declared yourself king. Margaret had to bribe you with cookies to take off the crown." Daniel laughed. "I remember that. And you told me every king needed to write his own laws. And you made one law," Walter added, grinning. "No bedtime after cartoons." They both laughed again, louder this time. Keanu entered, and Daniel stood up. "I don't know how to thank you." Keanu shrugged. "You just did." "No, really," Daniel said. "I don't think I would have come back if it weren't for that video. If it weren't for you sitting with him, treating him like someone who mattered." Keanu sat beside Walter. "He does matter. So do you. Sometimes, the only thing standing between two people is the lie they believe, that they're alone." Walter reached for his son's hand. "You're not alone, Daniel. You never were. And neither was I. Not really." That night, the three of them shared dinner together, not in a fancy restaurant, but in the same humble apartment. Pasta, garlic, bread, and cheap sparkling water. The food wasn't remarkable, but the company was. They spoke about the future, about mending the past, and about starting again. Daniel said he wanted to stay for a few weeks to help Walter get settled, to talk more, to learn more. And Walter, his heart fuller than it had been in decades, agreed, with tears in his eyes. Later, when the dishes were done and the city had gone to sleep, Walter stood at the window and looked out. The streetlights glowed like distant stars. He turned to Keanu. "I never asked, why were you at the bus stop that night?" Keanu smiled. "I just finished a book and needed air, but maybe I was supposed to be there." Walter nodded. "I think so too." Back to the classroom, the school building was old, with bricks that had seen decades of seasons pass, and windows that let in streaks of morning light across dusty hallways. Echoes of children's laughter bounced off the walls, footsteps hurried between lockers, and voices of teachers called out instructions to sleepy students. It was a place bursting with life, but also weighed down with forgotten corners. In D, one of those corners, a small classroom, had recently been reopened, and behind its desk sat someone no student expected. Walter adjusted his glasses, straightened his tie, a gift from Keanu, and placed his notebook beside a worn copy of a history textbook. The blackboard still had chalk residue from years ago. He took a breath, both nervous and excited. It had been almost 15 years since he stood in front of a classroom, and yet it felt like he'd never left. A bell rang. The door creaked open. Students entered, dragging their feet, some chewing gum, others scrolling their phones. They glanced at the old man behind the desk and whispered to each other. "Who's that?" one muttered. "Is he a sub?" another asked. Their faces carried the weight of boredom and skepticism, as if they had already decided the class would be a waste of time. Walter stood slowly and cleared his throat. "Good morning," he began, his voice calm but steady. My name is Walter Hayes. I'm not here to scold you. I'm not here to judge you. I'm just here to tell you stories. That caught their attention. Stories? This wasn't the usual lecture start. History, Walter continued, isn't just dates and wars and kings. It's people. People like you. People like me. People who loved, fought, fell, and rose again. I want to show you what it really means to live through time. He walked over to the board and wrote one word in chalk. Resilience. This, he said, is what connects all great stories. He told them about a young boy in Poland who escaped from a war-torn village and later helped rebuild an entire city. He told them about a woman who crossed deserts on foot to bring books to children who had never seen one. He told them about a man who stood at a bus stop crying in the rain until a stranger sat beside him and changed everything. The students leaned in, slowly, cautiously. Phones slipped back into pockets. Gum stopped chewing. Eyes widened. No one dared interrupt. Walter didn't teach from the textbook. He taught from memory, from emotion, from truth. In the days that followed, the students began arriving earlier. Some stayed after class just to talk. Walter listened to their problems. The boy who couldn't read well but pretended he could. The girl who hadn't spoken to her. Mother in weeks, the kid who acted tough because he was scared at home. Walter didn't offer easy answers. He offered understanding. And for many of them, that was something they had never known before. Word spread quickly. Teachers stopped by his classroom to watch. Some of them, younger than Walter, found themselves taking notes, not just on what he said, but how he said it. The principal called him into her office one afternoon and asked if he'd consider staying longer than a few weeks. She told him the students had started writing essays again. That attendance in his class had gone up. That even parents were asking about the storyteller teacher. Meanwhile, Keanu kept visiting when he could. Sometimes he'd sit at the back of the classroom in disguise, hood up, sunglasses on, smiling as Walter brought history to life. Other times he'd wait after class and take Walter and Daniel out for dinner. One evening, as they sat in a quiet booth at a small Italian place, Daniel leaned over and said, "You know, Dad, I haven't seen you smile like this in years." Walter looked down at his plate and smiled. "I didn't know I still could." "You've changed lives," Keanu added. "You've reminded those kids that the past isn't something to memorize. It's something to learn from. And you reminded me that kindness doesn't need a stage. It just needs a seat at the bus stop." Walter reached across the table and squeezed their hands. "And you two reminded me that even after loss, life can still offer second chances." But it wasn't all easy. There was one boy, Eli, who never spoke. He sat in the back row, hoodie up, eyes always on the floor. Teachers said he was a lost cause. They said he had problems at home. They said he'd probably drop out before the year ended. Walter didn't believe in lost causes. One day after class, he sat beside Eli and said nothing. Just sat. For 10 minutes. The next day, he gave Eli a notebook. "Write whatever you want," he said. "You don't have to show me, just write." A week passed. Eli handed him the notebook. Inside were poems, raw, broken, beautiful poems about pain, about anger, about loneliness, about dreams of flying away. Walter read every word. Then he asked Eli if he'd like to read one aloud. The boy shook his head, terrified. But Walter didn't push. He read one for him. The classroom was silent. Some kids snickered, but most were moved. Eli never missed another day after that. More weeks passed. Walter's class became a refuge for the lost, the tired, the misunderstood. He brought in old books, guest speakers, even Keanu once, who talked about grief and hope without ever mentioning fame. Students began opening up. Their grades improved. Some even started sharing their own stories, at first in writing, then aloud. The classroom had become a place not just for education, but for healing. One day, Walter walked in and found a letter on his desk. It read, "Dear Mr. Hayes, before I met you, I thought I was just a failure. I thought no one saw me. but you looked at me like I mattered. You listened. You told me stories that made me believe in myself. Thank you for being the teacher I never thought I'd have." Samantha Walter folded the letter slowly. His hands trembled, not from age, but from emotion. That night, as he sat with Keanu and Daniel on the balcony, watching the city lights flicker, he said something that made both men quiet. "I think this is what Margaret would have wanted, not for me to mourn her forever, but to find a way to live again." Keanu raised his glass of tea. "To Margaret." Daniel joined him. "To second chances." And Walter, with tears in his eyes and peace in his heart, clinked his glass. "To kindness, the kind that saves lives." The speech that made the world cry spring had arrived in the city. Flowers bloomed on the edge of sidewalks, birds chirped along windowsills, and a gentle breeze moved through the streets like a quiet song. At the school, the students buzzed with excitement. A special assembly was scheduled for the afternoon. Most believed it was just another guest speaker, another motivational talk, but whispers had spread and curiosity filled the air. In the principal's office, Walter sat quietly, adjusting his tie. This one was different. Navy blue with thin, golden lines. A student had gifted it to him last week with a handwritten note that said, "For the teacher who taught me more than books." He ran his fingers across the smooth fabric and took a deep breath. Keanu sat across from him, leaning forward, his elbows resting on his knees. "You ready?" Keanu asked softly. Walter nodded, though his hands trembled slightly. "It's been a while since I stood on a stage." "You're not here to perform," Keanu said. "You're here to remind them what matters." Just then, the principal entered with Daniel, who now volunteered at the school part-time. He had found something meaningful again, connecting with students, guiding them, even helping build a mentorship program in Walter's name. Daniel placed a hand on his father's shoulder. "I'm proud of you, Dad. No matter what happens out there, you already changed lives." Walter smiled gently. "Thank you, son. That means everything." The bell rang. The assembly hall filled quickly. Students crammed into seats, teachers lined the walls, and a soft hum of chatter rippled across the space. Phones were out, cameras ready. Everyone knew something important was about to happen. The principal stepped up to the podium. "Good afternoon, students and staff. Today we gather not just to celebrate one of our own, but to honor the power of second chances, kindness, and the courage to keep going when life gets hard." She gestured toward the curtain. "Please welcome Mr. Walter Hayes." The applause started slow, polite, but when Walter stepped onto the stage, walking steadily with his notebook tucked under one arm, something shifted. The students saw not just a teacher, but a man who had given them more than lessons. He had given them truth. The clapping grew, louder, rising into a full standing ovation. Walter reached the podium and looked out. Hundreds of young faces stared back at him. Some smiled, some wiped away tears, some simply waited, curious to hear what he would say. He opened his notebook, then closed it again. "I wrote a speech," he began, "but today, I'd rather speak from the heart." The room fell into deep silence. "I'm not a hero. I'm not famous. I'm just a man who once sat at a bus stop crying in the rain, thinking the world had forgotten me." He paused. "But one person, just one, saw me. And that moment changed my life." He looked at Keanu, in the front row, who nodded quietly. "I want to talk to you today about pain, not because I want you to feel sorry for me, but because I want you to understand that pain doesn't mean the story is over. It means the next chapter is beginning." He stepped away from the podium, walking slowly across the stage. "Some of you come to school with heavy hearts. Maybe you're struggling at home. Maybe someone you love is gone. Maybe you feel invisible. I've been there. I know how cold that kind of loneliness can be." He held up a hand, trembling but strong. "But hear me now. No one is truly alone. Not forever. Kindness finds a way. Sometimes it looks like a friend, sometimes it's a stranger, and sometimes it's a moment you never expect." He looked out at the crowd, locking eyes with the students he had come to love. "I see you, I see your effort, your pain, your dreams, and I want you to know something. You matter, every single one of you, and no matter how lost you feel, there's always a way back." A few students in the crowd began to cry. Others stood up slowly, clapping through their tears. "This school gave me more than a second chance," Walter continued. "It gave me a reason to live again. And you students, you gave me that gift." He walked back to the podium, voice thick with emotion. "So I ask you, when you leave here today, don't forget to look up. Look around. See the people who need to be seen. Listen to the ones who are silent. Be the kindness that saves someone's life." He ended with a whisper, "Because someone did it for me, and now I live to do it for others." The auditorium erupted in applause. Students stood, teachers clapped, and even the toughest kids in the back wiped their eyes. The video of Walter's speech spread across social media that same evening, reaching millions by the next morning. People across the world watched a once broken man, now strong and steady, speak words that touched something universal. Comments flooded in. "This man healed something inside me. I wish my grandfather was still alive to hear this. Thank you, Keanu, for sitting with him that night." And one comment, pinned to the top, read, "Kindness is a language even the broken can understand." In the days that followed, Walter received letters from across the globe. Students, teachers, single parents, war veterans, strangers in pain. They all wrote to him. And Walter replied to every single one, often with a simple message: "You're not forgotten." Keanu and Daniel helped him organize workshops, speak at events, and start a community program focused on connection and healing. A small foundation was formed in Walter's name, offering support to the elderly, mentorship for youth, and meals for the homeless. One evening, long after the sun had set, Walter, Daniel, and Keanu sat on the balcony again. They didn't say much. They didn't have. To below them, the city buzzed as usual. People moved, lights blinked, cars passed by. But high above the noise, three men sat in quiet peace, each changed, each whole, each proof that one small moment of kindness could echo across the world. Walter looked up at the stars and whispered, "Thank you, Margaret." And somewhere in a place beyond the sky, she smiled.